Hi, everybody. Today we will be talking about the topic of women, and we will be covering this from both a local, from the United States perspective, as well as a global perspective. And we will go through some of the issues that women face, as well as the progress that has been made. So, just a little bit of background and statistics on women. They do make up 50.8% of the population, or 166.4 million females. The life expectancy is 81.1 years old, which is longer than a male, which is 78.6. From women that are aged 25 to 49, you can expect to see about 69% of those women to be employed. And out of that, 42% will have a bachelor's degree, and this data is from 2016, so pretty recently. And there has been a lot of progress that has been made towards female education, especially going to colleges and universities and achieving higher education degrees. And out of those women, the median weekly earnings is $789, and that is about $200 less than the median weekly earnings for a male, which we will talk about later in the presentation. So now we will talk about patriarchy and just a little bit of history on this. So patriarchy is a social construct where females do not really have any power, and all of the power and leadership roles are held by males. And this has been in society from 3100 BC, so it's been around a long time. And this is when it developed, was from 3100 BC to around 600 BC was the first documented times of this, when women were exchanged between tribes to be married, and this was at very young ages. And from this, it instilled in men's heads that women did not have power, and that the primary power was held by males from being able to trade these women from tribe to tribe. This was also used as a domination of warlike tribes over tribes with no warrior class to lead women into enslavement. So they would be traded and then treated as slaves. So this has been around for a very long time. Now that we've talked about the history of a patriarchy, I'll talk about how the patriarchy affects the United States. So the United States is a patriarchal society, meaning again that males primarily hold the power of the system for political leadership, business management, even religious institutions. So in all of these roles, it is more common to see males being giving legislation or holding positions as CEOs or executive managers. And then in religious institutions, it is very rare that you'll see a female in a head of a church or anything like that. So just a fact on the business management side of the patriarchal United States, women make up 54% of the workforce at S&P 500 companies, which is a good amount of females that are employed and that are working at these large companies. But out of that, only 29% have executive senior level management roles, and then out of those S&P 500 companies, only 2% are CEOs. So that really just reinforces that the United States is a patriarchal society and still has a lot of work to grow into more women in these upper level positions. And then the US was ranked 73rd out of 144 countries globally for women's political empowerment. So again, there's just a lot of work that still needs to be done in business roles and closing the gender gap.
The fight for women's rights began long before we can imagine. Women have suffered inequality since the beginning of time. Here are some key events in the history of women's rights. On March 31st, 1776, Abigail Adams wrote a letter to her husband, John Adams, to, quote, "Remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could," end quote. On October 16, 1916, Margaret Sanger opened the first birth control clinic in the United States. It was located in Brownsville, Brooklyn, and her clinic was deemed illegal under the Comstock laws forbidding birth control. When she had to close 2 additional times due to legal threats, she closed the clinic and eventually founded the American Birth Control League in 1921, which was the precursor to today's Planned Parenthood. On August 19, 1920, the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution was completed, declaring, quote, "The rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex," end quote. It is nicknamed the Susan B. Anthony Amendment in honor of her work on behalf of women's suffrage. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus for a white man. Rosa Parks' actions that day contributed to the launch of the Civil Rights Movement. On May 9, 1960, the Food and Drug Administration approved the first commercially produced birth control pill in the world, allowing women to control when and if they have children. On June 10, 1963, President John F. Kennedy signed into law the Equal Pay Act. This act prohibited sex-based wage discrimination between men and women performing the same job in the same workplace, which was a big win for women activists. On January 22, 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court declared that the Constitution protects a woman's legal right to an abortion. The Roe v. Wade decision was made 7-2 and legitimized the women's movement as a political force. On January 24, 2013, the U.S. military lifts the ban against women serving in combat positions. On July 26, 2016, Hillary Clinton became the first woman to receive a presidential nomination from a major political party. American women have long fought for equal footing throughout the nation's history. The Equal Pay Act requires that men and women are given equal pay for equal work in the same establishment. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy signed the Equal Pay Act into law. Under the Equal Pay Act, employers may not pay unequal jobs that require equal skill, effort, and responsibility. All forms of compensation are covered in this act, including salary, overtime pay, bonuses, stock options, profit sharing, and bonus plans, life insurance, vacation or holiday pay, hotel accommodations or reimbursements, and etc. Movement began in 1848 when a women's suffrage movement began in 1848 when a women's rights convention was held in New York. This convention is thought of as the beginning of the suffrage movement. Under the leadership of Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and other women's rights pioneers, suffragists lobbied Congress to pass a constitutional amendment to enfranchise women. Many politicians were unwilling to listen to a disenfranchised group, which made women realize that they need to win the right to vote. Leadership of the suffrage movement created 2 organizations: National American Women's Suffrage Association and the National Women's Party. The National American Women's Suffrage Association undertook campaigns to enfranchise women in individual states and simultaneously lobbied President Wilson and Congress to pass a women's suffrage constitutional amendment. The National American Women Party, under the leadership of Alice Paul, was a more militant organization. The NWP undertook radical actions, including picketing the White House, in order to convince Wilson and Congress to pass a women's suffrage amendment. In 1920, due to the combined efforts of the NAWSA and the NWP, the 19th Amendment, enfranchising women, was finally ratified. This victory is considered the most significant achievement of women in the progressive era. It was the single largest extension of democratic voting rights in our nation's history, and it was achieved peacefully through democratic processes.
So, a big topic that is super important right now is women in education. And on a global scale, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So, in the United States, there has been some growth and a lot more women going to colleges and universities. But globally, more than 29 million girls are not receiving a primary education. And this is a big issue in sub Saharan Africa and Southern Asia specifically. So, out of those 29 million girls, three-fourths of those come from those regions. So, those are the regions that need to be targeted the most right now. Another just statistic is that women make up two-thirds of the world's illiterate people, which just shows how much that needs to be done to women education and opportunities to learn. And these statistics are not because of female capabilities. So in countries where women have been receiving education, 76% of girls finish primary school and only 74% of boys. And that's not a huge gap, but that does show that females are capable of receiving the education, learning, and finishing their schooling. And then also girls repeated less classes and progressed more in a more timely manner than the males in the class. So this is an extremely important issue, like I said, because every additional year of education increases wages by 10 to 20%. Educated women marry later and have fewer children, which we will talk about later in the presentation about how and globally females are getting married at very young ages and traded basically like slavery, and they also have less exposure to violence and trafficking. So again, this is just a very important topic. Now diving into the United States side of women in education, like I said, there's been substantial growth, specifically in the past 2 decades. But in 2012, women did outnumber men for enrollment into college universities, which was a huge achievement. And out of the undergraduate degrees and master's degrees program, 60% were women that attained those degrees. So that's a huge step in the right direction. However, there is still a lack of female representation in certain fields such as engineering, manufacturing, and science, technological degrees. So this is just something that I think we can do a little bit more towards. A statistic is that 1 in 5 men declared engineering majors, but only 1 in 20 women. So that is a pretty significant gap, and hopefully over the upcoming years we will see more women graduating with engineering and science degrees. So now I'm just talking about kind of the gap between men and women in specific degrees such as engineering and science. I thought this video was a really good video to show how we might be able to contribute to decrease the gap and kind of teach young girls that they can do exactly what men can do. And I just think that the speaker does a really good job at portraying this. So it's a short video.
So a few years ago, I did something really brave, or some would say really stupid. I ran for Congress. For years, I had existed safely behind the scenes in politics as a fundraiser, as an organizer, but in my heart, I always wanted to run. The sitting congresswoman had been in my district since 1992. She had never lost a race, and no one had really even run against her in a Democratic primary. But in my mind, this was my way to make a difference, to disrupt the status quo. The polls, however, told a very different story. My pollsters told me that I was crazy to run, that there was no way that I could win. But I ran anyway. And in 2012, I became an upstart in a New York City congressional race. I swore I was going to win. I had the endorsement from the New York Daily News, the Wall Street Journal snapped pictures of me on Election Day, and CNBC called it one of the hottest races in the country. I raised money from everyone I knew, including Indian aunties that were just so happy an Indian girl was running. But on election day, the polls were right, and I only got 19% of the vote. And the same papers that said I was a rising political star now said I wasted $1.3 million on 6,321 votes. Don't do the math. It was humiliating. Now, before you get the wrong idea, this is not a talk about the importance of failure, nor is it about leaning in. I tell you the story of how I ran for Congress because I was 33 years old, and it was the first time in my entire life that I had done something that was truly brave, where I didn't worry about being perfect. And I'm not alone. So many women I talk to tell me that they gravitate towards careers and professions that they know they're going to be great in, that they know they're going to be perfect in. And it's no wonder why. Most girls are taught to avoid risk and failure. They're taught to smile pretty, play it safe, get all A's. Boys, on the other hand, are taught to play rough, swing high, crawl to the top of the monkey bars, and then just jump off head first. And by the time they're adults, and whether they're negotiating a raise or even asking someone out on a date, they're habituated to take risk after risk. They're rewarded for it. It's often said in Silicon Valley, no one even takes you seriously unless you've had 2 failed startups. In other words, we're raising our girls to be perfect, and we're raising our boys to be brave. Some people worry about our federal deficit, but I worry about our bravery deficit. Our economy, our society, we're just losing out because we're not raising our girls to be brave. The bravery deficit is why women are underrepresented in STEM, in C-suites, in boardrooms, in Congress, and pretty much everywhere you look. In the 1980s, psychologist Carol Dweck looked at how bright 5th graders handled an assignment that was too difficult for them. She found that bright girls were quick to give up. The higher the IQ, the more likely they were to give up. Bright boys, on the other hand, found the difficult material to be a challenge. They found it energizing. They were more likely to redouble their efforts. What's going on? Well, at the 5th grade level, girls routinely outperform boys in every subject, including math and science. So it's not a question of ability. The difference is in how boys and girls approach a challenge. And it doesn't just end in 5th grade. An HP report found that men will apply for a job if they meet only 60% of the qualifications. But women? Women will apply only if they meet 100% of the qualifications. 100%. This study is usually invoked as evidence that, well, women need a little more confidence. But I think it's evidence that women have been socialized to aspire to perfection and they're overly cautious. And even when we're ambitious, even when we're leaning in, that socialization of perfection has caused us to take less risks in our careers. And so those 600,000 jobs that are open right now in computing and tech, women are being left behind. And it means our economy is being left behind on all the innovation and problems women would solve if they were socialized to be brave instead of socialized to be perfect. So in 2012, I started a company to teach girls to code. And what I found is that by teaching them to code, I had socialized them to be brave. Coding, it's an endless process of trial and error, of trying to get the right command in the right place, with sometimes just a semicolon, making the difference between success and failure. Code breaks, and then it falls apart, and it often takes many, many tries till that magical moment when what you're trying to build comes to life. It requires perseverance. It requires imperfection. we immediately see in our program our girls' fear of not getting it right, of not being perfect. Every Girls Who Code teacher tells me the same story. During the first week, when the girls are learning how to code, a student will call her over and she'll say, "I don't know what code to write." The teacher will look at her screen and she'll see a blank text editor. If she didn't know any better, she'll think that her student spent the past 20 minutes just staring at the screen. But if she presses undo a few times, she'll see that her student wrote code and then deleted it. She tried, she came close, but she didn't get it exactly right. Instead of showing the progress that she made, she rather showed nothing at all. Perfection or bust. It turns out that our girls are really good at coding, but it's not enough just to teach them to code. My friend Lev Bree, who's a professor at the University of Columbia and teaches Intro to Java, tells me about his office hours with computer science students. When the guys are struggling with an assignment, they'll come in and they'll say, "Professor, there's something wrong with my code." The girls will come in and say, "Professor, there's something wrong with me." We have to begin to undo the socialization of perfection, but we gotta combine it with building a sisterhood that lets girls know that they are not alone. Because trying harder is not gonna fix a broken system. I can't tell you how many women tell me, "I'm afraid to raise my hand. I'm afraid to ask a question because I don't want to be the only one who doesn't understand, the only one who's struggling." When we teach girls to be brave and we have a supportive network cheering them on, they will build incredible things. And I see this every day. Take, for instance, 2 of our high school students who built a game called Tampon Run. Yes, Tampon Run. To fight against the menstruation taboo and sexism in gaming. Or the Syrian refugee who dares show her love for her new country by building an app to help Americans get to the polls. Or a 16-year-old girl who built an algorithm to help detect whether a cancer is benign or malignant, in the off chance that she can save her daddy's life because he has cancer. These are just 3 examples of thousands of girls who've been socialized to be imperfect, who've learned to keep trying, who've learned perseverance. And whether they become coders or the next Hillary Clinton or Beyonce, they will not defer their dreams. And those dreams have never been more important for our country. For the American economy, for any economy to grow, to truly innovate, we cannot leave behind half our population. We have to socialize our girls to be comfortable with imperfection, and we gotta do it now. We cannot wait for them to learn how to be brave like I did when I was 33 years old. We have to teach them to be brave in schools and early in their careers when it has the most potential to impact their lives and the lives of others. And we have to show them that they will be loved and accepted, not for being perfect, but for being courageous. And so I need each of you to tell every young woman you know, your sister, your niece, your employee, your colleague, to be comfortable with imperfection. Because when we teach girls to be imperfect and we help them leverage it, we will build a movement of young women who are brave and who will build a better world for themselves and for each and every one of us. Thank you.
Although there has been legislation to prevent a wage gap in America, there still is one. As you can see on this graph, they are projecting pay equity to occur in 2093. Over half a century after pay discrimination became illegal in the United States, a persistent pay gap between men and women continues to hurt our nation's workers and our national economy. Women working full-time in the U.S. are paid 82 cents to every dollar earned by men. The consequences of this gap affect women throughout their lives. Though women now outspace men in higher education, women also hold nearly 2/3 of the outstanding student debt in the United States. And because of the gender pay gap, women have a harder time repaying loans. The United Nations defines violence against women as any act of gender based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or mental harm or suffering to women, including threats such as acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private life. It is estimated that 35% of women worldwide have experienced either physical and or sexual intimate partner violence or sexual violence by a non-partner at some point in their lives. Less than 40% of women who experience this violence will report it. And globally, as many as 38% of murders of women are committed by a male intimate partner. The Me Too movement was founded in 2006, and their vision was to address both the dearth in resources for survivors of sexual violence and to build a community of advocates driven by survivors who will be at the forefront of creating solutions to interrupt sexual violence in their communities. The Me Too movement supports survivors of sexual violence and their allies by connecting survivors to resources, offering community organizing resources, and gathering sexual violence researchers and research. The Me Too movement affirms empowerment through empathy and community-based action. Ideals of beauty differ in cultures across the globe. Different societies have different pressures. Like, for example, when we learned in class about bleaching cream, how women feel that they have to be lighter to be prettier. A multi-billion-dollar economy is built on our insecurities about the size, shape, and appearance of our womanly bodies. The cosmetics industry promotes impossible standards of flawless beauty, while suggesting that natural features such as fine lines and wrinkles, freckles, and even pores are unsightly. An example of societal pressure on women of color today is not feeling comfortable showing their natural hair because society has deemed straight, sleek hair as beautiful. There are always going to be different ideas of beauty, but our society needs to come to terms with that everyone is beautiful the way that they are. Human trafficking is defined as the action or practice of illegally transporting people from one country or area to another, typically for the purposes of forced labor or sexual exploitation. Traffickers lure, manipulate, and control vulnerable individuals using a variety of coercive means. Mental health problems can result from human trafficking, such as anxiety, depression, self-injuries behavior, suicidal ideation and suicide, drug and alcohol addiction, post-traumatic stress disorder, otherwise known as PTSD, and dissociative disorders and complex PTSD. In order to effectively combat trafficking, psychologists and policymakers must collaborate to better understand the deleterious risks of trafficking and exploitation, and prevention and intervention strategies for vulnerable populations.
So, as I mentioned earlier, with women getting married at very young ages, this is a huge issue globally, specifically in Southern Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, as you can see on the graph. It is the largest majority of forced marriages, but each year 12 million girls are getting married before the age of 18. And this isn't because they want to be getting married. This is strictly because of gender inequality and poverty in these countries. And these girls are being forced into marriage for economic benefits or various reasons, but this violates their rights to health and education. So these women are not receiving education, and then at young ages they're being exposed to violence. So this is a huge issue, and as you can see from the graph, between 40 and 50% of women are being married between the ages of 15 and 18 in these countries. So this is something that needs to be addressed globally.
We have come a long way in our fight for women's equality, but we also have a long way to go. Our progress has only shown our strength. Women's rights are human rights, and human rights are women's rights, and that is something society is starting to come to terms with. Today, we have seen things such as women's marches. Women's March is committed to dismantling systems of oppression through nonviolent resistance and building inclusive structures guided by self-determination, dignity, and respect. The Women's March group stands by that women's rights are human rights. We have seen our first female presidential candidate, and we have an International Women's Day every year.
So going off of all the progress that has been made towards women's rights and surrounding women, I wanted to just end the presentation on women making a difference. So the first clip is of Katherine Johnson, who was known as the human computer, and she was a genius mathematician at NASA, and she was the real-life person behind the movie Hidden Figures, and she played a huge part in Neil Armstrong walking on the moon. So a lot of her efforts have been overlooked, but now with this movie, people are kind of being more aware. So this is just a short clip to kind of highlight her accomplishments throughout her life. The second clip is an Always ad campaign that really showcases how women can be ingrained to think of themselves and that they are strong, and does a really great job at portraying them in a positive light. So they're just a few short clips to watch.
Letting her know how much Johnson.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Someone with a handle on analytic geometry. We can't fill that position out of the East.
Permanent or temp?
Everything's temporary, Dorothy. You have someone?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Catherine's the gal for that. She can handle any numbers you put in front of her.
I'll check her credentials.
My problem was to answer questions, and I did that to the best of my ability at all times, correct or incorrect. But that's my theory. Do your best all the time. Like what you're doing, then you will do your best. If you don't like it, shame on you.
Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm going to just give you some actions to do and just do the first thing that comes to mind. Show me what it looks like to run like a girl.
My hair.
Show me what it looks like to fight like a girl. Now throw like a girl.
Aww.
My name is Dakota, and I'm 10 years old.
Show me what it looks like to run like a girl. Throw like a girl. Fight like a girl. What does it mean to you when I say run like a girl?
It means run fast as you can.
So do you think you just insulted your sister?
No. I mean, yeah, insulted girls, but not my sister.
Is like a girl a good thing?
Actually, I don't know if it's a bad thing or a good thing. It sounds like a bad thing. It sounds like you're trying to humiliate someone.
So when they're in that vulnerable time between 10 and 12, how do you think it affects them when somebody uses like a girl as an insult?
I think it definitely drops their self-confidence and really puts them down because during that time, they're already trying to figure themselves out. And when somebody says you hit like a girl, it's like, well, what does that mean? Because they think they're a strong person. It's kind of like telling them that they're weak and they're not as good as them.
And what advice do you have to young girls who are told they run like a girl, kick like a girl, hit like a girl, swim like a girl?
Keep doing it because it's working. If somebody else says that running like a girl or kicking like a girl or shooting like a girl is something that you shouldn't be doing, that's their problem. Because if you're still scoring and you're still getting to the ball on time and you're still being first, you're doing it right. It doesn't matter what they say. I mean, yes, I kick like a girl and I swim like a girl and I walk like a girl and I wake up in the morning like a girl because I am a girl. And that is not something that I should be ashamed of. So I'm going to do it anyway. That's what they should do.
If I asked you to run like a girl now, would you do it differently?
I would run like myself.
Would you like a chance to redo it?
Yeah.
Why can't run like a girl also mean win the race?
And lastly, here are all our references. And thank you guys for listening to learn a little bit more about women.